In this demo, I want to get you familiar with the dynamic generation of data-bound elements when you're working with content controls and items controls in data binding scenarios. These controls generate the rendering of the data-bound objects dynamically, and that adds elements to the visual tree. Understanding what's going on down at that level can be very helpful in diagnosing and debugging problems when they occur in your UI and in data binding scenarios. But because none of those elements exist in design time, if you haven't seen it in action, you may not know where to go. Starting point for this demo is a simple WPF project that already has a little bit of code in the code behind for going out and getting the products collection from our ZaDB context, similar to previous demos, and pushing it into a collection view source that's already up inside the view. The code behind also has some helper code that's basically going to generate a tree view based on a node in the visual tree. So I've got a helper method here called getTreeFromNode that's basically going to start at the current node and walk down using a helper down below called getVisualTree. GetVisualTree uses the VisualTree helper class in WPF to walk through all the children of the current node and then recursively, notice the call to getVisualTree here, recursively walk down to its children. It's basically generating a tree view item, which is a node for a tree view, for each item in the visual tree from the object that you pass in, annotating the node that you started with by square brackets. After it's walked down from the current node to all its children, generating a tree, it then starts walking up. So it has another helper method down below called getParent that will get the parent element of a current node, and then it uses that in a loop to walk up the tree and get each one of the parents until you get to the root of the visual tree. The tree view item that comes out of this can be passed to this helper called showTree that's going to basically create a tree view, put that root node into it, and pop it up in a window. So we're going to use this as a crude visualization of the visual tree and the elements that we're working with. So to get started, let's go over to our UI, and I'm just going to drag out a simple text box. Seemingly simple control, and we will give it a name of textbox1. I could then drop into my code behind and use my helper methods to visualize the visual tree from that node. So I'm going to go in here and say showTree, getTreeFromNode, textbox1. If we go ahead and run, we can see the text box loads up there, and we've got our visual tree here, starting at the root, which is the window, down through the grid that's its child. There's our text box. Then notice that the text box itself contains a border, scroll viewer, grid, rectangles, scroll content presenter, text box views, and blah, blah, blah. So the point is any given element within WPF that you declare at design time can have some complex structure generated at runtime based on that declaration. In this case, what you're seeing is the default control template for a text box. So this stuff is not so much being generated dynamically based on data, it's just part of the internal structure of a text box. Any control in WPF is going to have some amount of that. But what we're going to focus on next is the dynamic generation of elements based on data.